everyone, and welcome to Theater Appreciation. I'm your teacher, Professor Garcia, and today what we are going to be talking about is the English Renaissance, specifically the time where Shakespeare was around. Now, how many of you guys like Shakespeare? Not a lot, am I right? Most of us don't like Shakespeare because we were forced to sit through hours of terrible Shakespeare. But guess what? Back in Shakespeare's day, if the audience didn't like you, or if they heard a play was bad, they would all bring buckets of rotten fruit. And when the actors would come out on stage, they would just pelt them with it. Now, if you could pelt terrible actors with fruit, you'd probably go to even a bad show, right? So what we're going to cover today is a little bit about the history of England, why they were so late to the Renaissance, who paved the way for Shakespeare, and why people love Shakespeare so much today. Everything all starts with the War of the Roses.
Richard II was a king who stepped on a lot of toes, shall we say. And because he stepped on quite a few toes, he ended up having his crown stripped from him.
By his cousin.
England, like most other countries, believed that to be king, that was a divine recognition, that God himself chose you. Now, when a king's crown is stripped from him and then given to a cousin, then blood is in the water.
And everybody was like, well, I could totally be king then too, right? I could totally be king.
And now all nobles, just like sharks, start circling about, and they decide, well, maybe I can become king. And then they realize that they're just a heartbeat away from becoming king. And because of that, England started fighting each other. Cousins fought cousins, and that is initially what the War of the Roses was, the Cousins' War.
Because cousins were just murdering cousins over and over and over. And that led to some pretty unstable times for England.
Henry Tudor was the one who finally ended the war. And he placed himself as king, and the Tudor line became the first stabilizing force for England. And because of that, then they were able to enter the Renaissance with everyone else.
Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon. Now, she was related to the Spanish royalty. Now, Spain at this time was the powerhouse of military forces. And she wasn't giving him a son, and at this time he blamed her. So he went to the Pope and he was like, I'd like a divorce. And the Pope was like, no. Now, normally they would totally give a divorce, but they didn't because they didn't want to get Spain angry at them. So Henry was like, well, I'm going to create my own church then. I'm done with you.
Fine. If you won't give me a divorce, I will give myself one.
So he did. They created the Church of England. And because of that, there was this huge rift. He had a daughter, and her name was Mary. So he had Mary, and he had Elizabeth. But he still didn't have a son. So he went through a few more wives. And eventually he has a son, Edward. Now he dies. Edward is on the throne, but Edward's young, he's sickly, and then he dies. So then it's Mary. Now, Mary's mom was Catholic. Mary was Catholic. And she was like, that's it. England is turning back to Catholicism. And if you don't listen to me, you will all die. So she just starts murdering fools left and right. And she starts killing so many people that she gets the nickname Bloody Mary.
She also had a younger sister, Elizabeth, and because of that, she always was a little nervous about having Elizabeth around, and so she would kind of threaten her every single day, like, I don't know if I'll keep you around today. And so Elizabeth grew up in this just absolutely tumultuous relationship, was surrounded by people who were always threatening to kill her, so she was quite nervous, naturally. Then Mary thought she was getting pregnant. In fact, she wanted a baby so badly, and her body started to show signs of it. She started to grow a belly, and she thought she was getting pregnant, and it turned out to be a cancerous tumor. And this tumor ended up killing her. And so, well, she died. And when she died, Elizabeth then took over. Now, Elizabeth was not supposed to be, she had no idea she was going to be the queen. And now here she is, the queen. And so she begins to rule.
Now, she did not think she was going to be queen at all. But once she's queen, she gives England the stability, finally, for everyone to catch up to the rest of the world. At this point, England is so far behind, they're like, we can't follow neoclassical theory, so we're going to make up our own rules. Yeah, we'll make up our own rules. So what they do is they create iambic pentameter. Now, iambic pentameter is where you have 5 stress beats. Ta-tum, 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 right? And it mimicked the heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom. And they thought that if their speech matched the heartbeat, it was going to be the most human. Now, this is what Shakespeare was the best at, but Shakespeare was not the first to use it, and there were a lot of people that had to pave the way for Shakespeare.
The university wits were a rambunctious crew, and they are the ones that paved the way for Shakespeare.
One of those people was Christopher Marlowe. Now, Christopher Marlowe was the greatest of the writers at his time, and everybody loved him. He's the one who wrote Dr. Faustus, about the man who trades his soul to the devil for knowledge. And at the very end of the play, they had on the stage, they had this trap door that would open up and they'd give it teeth, and they would call it a hellmouth, and they'd have a fire down below, and they would drag people through the hellmouth into hell.
And Christopher Marlowe was a scoundrel. He was part of Her Majesty's Secret Service. He was an atheist, and he loved to brawl and fight. And actually, that's what got him killed.
Christopher Marlowe dies because, well, one day he's at a bar, and the next morning they find him with an ice pick in his skull. Now, we're not quite sure who killed him or why, because he was kind of one of those temperamental artists who there were quite a few reasons to kill him, but he ended up dying. But some people say that if he was still around when Shakespeare was around, like if he had lived longer, he would have been even better than Shakespeare.
John Lilly was another one of the university wits. And John Lilly, he started creating plays with English subjects, and then he would mix them with mythical characters. And these characters would interact.
You start getting these fun narratives that Shakespeare would later take on and combine into things like A Midsummer Night's Dream. Thomas Kidd starts writing revenge tragedies, and these are super bloody plays where someone's wronged in the beginning, and then they go out and they just murder all of the people who did them wrong. And so it would just end with pig's blood all over the stage.
There were people that were getting cut up, and stage was covered in blood. They were real crowd pleasers, and you can see his influence in some of Shakespeare's earlier works. So things like Titus Andronicus, where the young woman, her tongue is cut off and her arms are cut off, and at the very end of the play, everybody is dead. And finally, Shakespeare. Now, there's many things that we don't know about Shakespeare.
We know when he was born and when he died. We know that he moved to the city. We know he wrote a couple plays.
We know that his father was a local official and a glove maker. And so he grew up with a very good education. But he did not go to university, not like the other university wits. And the other strange things about him are that we're not even sure if Shakespeare looked exactly like the pictures that we have of him. And the reason that we say that is because all of the paintings of Shakespeare were completed after he had died. Now, we can guess that they are relatively close because all of his friends who were still alive did not object to those paintings or portrayals of him.
And every time he signed his name in a different way. So some people are like, could this dude even spell?
This is a normal thing at this time. Because nobody really had books where they just went, this is the exact way we're spelling this. They just spelled it the way they felt at that moment.
There were enough people around and enough people talked about him so that we do know that Shakespeare wrote those plays.
Other than that, there's not a lot that we actually know of him.
But if you want to know more, there's a book called Shakespeare by Bill Bryson. He really goes into the life of Shakespeare and a lot of gives you some really cool facts.
Now, Shakespeare created some of the most pivotal work, and what makes Shakespeare incredibly interesting is that we have more words that in our normal vernacular that come from Shakespeare than come from any other source, even more than the Bible. Think about that. One man influenced how we talk. And which words are those? Words and sayings. How about there's a method to my madness? That's Shakespeare.
Or, the game's afoot.
There are daggers in men's smiles.
We're in a pickle.
That's Shakespeare. Cold-hearted.
Cold-blooded.
Warm-blooded.
Hard-hearted.
Those are all Shakespeare.
So what you're going to do is you guys are going to go and watch a Shakespeare play. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. But hopefully you will. What I want you to do is I want you to open up the play and read along with the story that you're watching or listening to. It's going to help you understand it more. And you have to remember too that nobody at Shakespeare's time talked the way he did in his plays anyway. But that's why they went. They went there so that they could learn new words. And if you've ever listened to a really good rap beef, right, where two rappers are going at it, and you get to find these really, really cool insults, they would do that when they went to Shakespeare plays. Like they would come up and they would sit down and just listen to all of the cool insults that would come. And then you get cool words like puke. He invented puke. Or at least that word, he didn't invent puking, but people were like, wow, that's a great word. And then they start using it. And then we are still using it today. That's how important that guy is. Now, while you're reading these stories, just take it easy and trust that the more you listen to it, the easier it'll be. Thank you guys very much, and I'll see you soon.